Cooperative is a business owned by the people who use it.
It offers people who have not very many resources an opportunity to pool those and conduct an economic activity that benefits them.
It makes something happen that needs to happen, and it does it in a way that people feel really good about what they're doing.
And I think cooperatives right now could be the best thing that could really happen to this country.
Americans have always believed in working together to solve their problems. That's the whole idea behind a cooperative. I'm James Earl Jones. A cooperative is a unique kind of organization that is member-used and member-owned. Today, more than 100 million Americans belong to cooperatives, and the number is rapidly growing. You can join a cooperative to buy a home, get a loan, sell any kind of product, buy any kind of product, or provide yourself with a service like healthcare, electricity, or telephone. Cooperatives come in all shapes and sizes, from the Associated Press to this food buying club. We're going to tell you more about cooperatives in this program. We'll show you how they work, what they've done, and how you could benefit from belonging to one. Our story begins in Philadelphia in 1752. There, Benjamin Franklin helped to found the country's first successful cooperative. Fire was a constant problem in colonial America. Franklin himself was a volunteer firefighter. He and other Philadelphians decided to put money in a pool to insure themselves in the event that their homes burned down. The idea was to share the cost and the risk of fire protection mutually.
All persons inclined to subscribe to the articles of insurance of houses from fire in or near this city are desired to appear at the courthouse.
This was the birth of the Mutual Insurance Company. Mutual companies were based on the ideas of self-help and mutual aid. Some of the largest insurers in the country began in this cooperative way. A group of farmers in Ohio tried the idea in 1926. They wanted to lower the cost of insuring their automobiles. Their risks were lower than city drivers, so they decided to form their own mutual insurance business. Farmer agents went door to door signing up their neighbors. In the first year, they sold 40,000 policies. Eventually, they grew into the nationwide mutual insurance company. The mood in colonial America was one that fostered cooperation. Americans, Franklin informed the world, were
assisted by the goodwill of their neighbors.
In 1844, in a place called Rochdale, England, a group of 28 tradespeople formed the Rochdale Equitable Pioneers Society. They opened a shop on a street called Toad Lane. Members invested their money, their time, and their energy and opened the first consumer cooperative. Their goal was to provide themselves with their basic human needs. As their business grew, they developed a set of working principles that have been practiced by cooperatives for more than 150 years. Cooperatives are owned and democratically controlled by their members. Goods and services are sold to members at the least possible cost. And if the co-op makes a surplus, the surplus is returned to members based on the amount of business they did with the cooperative. The fame of the Rochdale pioneers comes not from what they did, but the way they did it. They worked together so that not one, but all could benefit. The need for a timely way to distribute news and information became evident during the War of 1812. Andrew Jackson fought the famous Battle of New Orleans, 2 weeks after a peace treaty had been signed in Paris. In the 1800s, news was sent from Europe to New York on transatlantic steamers.
Back in those days, there was no transatlantic cable, and the only way to get news from Europe was to meet the steamships as they docked in New York. The various New York publishers decided that they wanted to scoop each other, and so they began sending reporters out in small boats, and then they would furiously row back to port and try to get their interviews in print so that they could beat their competition. Well, the publishers decided that it might be more efficient, certainly more economical, maybe even safer, since the reporters were beginning to fight, if they would send one reporter in one boat to interview the passengers, rush back and provide his interviews to all 6 of the newspapers. And that was the beginning of an association that later became the Associated Press.
It began as a cooperative news-gathering service for New York newspapers, but membership grew to include all news-gathering organizations. By banding together and sharing expenses, newspapers, large and small, had equal access to the news that was shaping the nation.
The AP is owned and controlled by the 1,500 American newspapers that use its news, and by the 6,000 American radio and television stations that are associate members of the Associated Press. About 1 billion people each day read, hear, or see Associated Press news. There's no way that any one member, one newspaper, one network, one television station or radio station could afford to do what the Associated Press does. It is a form of sharing the news and pictures of all of the members of the cooperative for the benefit of all of the other members of the cooperative.
In 1857, one of the founders of the Associated Press published a book about the Rochdale pioneers, and the cooperative idea began to spread across America. No example of cooperation is more illuminating than the way American farmers banded together to improve their lives and the abundance of our food supply. With the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the nation began to expand. Millions of settlers moved west in search of wealth and vast fertile lands. The gold in California was not all found in the mines and streams. Much of it grew on millions of citrus trees. Growers dreamed of shipping their crops east, but shipping in small quantities was too expensive. Growers in Los Angeles decided to join together to market their crops cooperatively. By shipping in volume, they could reduce their transportation costs and share any profits. To advertise the product, someone suggested Kissed by the Sun, and the cooperative became known as Sun-Kissed Growers. Cooperatives revolutionized agriculture in this country. Many of the familiar brand names in supermarkets come from farmer-owned cooperatives. Though they function like large organizations, they are still jointly owned by their individual farmers, ranchers, and growers. Sunkist, for example, is owned by 800 producers and packing houses in California and Arizona. The Pinkerton family is one of its member owners.
When you think of cooperatives and agriculture, you have to think of America. And there's some fundamentals that typify what it is to be an American. One of those is the ability to come together and give strength to the little guy.
The co-op brings small small ranchers, 10, 15, 20-acre people into a marketing group. It brings all of our product together. It grades it according to size, color, and then it markets it across the country and across the world, in fact.
Early in the century, one of the problems farmers faced was credit. Negative conditions like drought and insects made bankers look at farming as a risky business. With a charter from Congress, farmers were able to start a nationwide financial cooperative, tailored to the specific needs of agriculture. In essence, the system allowed farmers to borrow money from themselves. Over the years, the farm credit system has lent billions of dollars to its farmer members. Because of their remote locations, farmers also formed cooperatives to provide themselves with critical supplies like feed, seed, petroleum, and fertilizer. Arnie Weisenbeck and his family belonged to a supply cooperative called Cenex.
The philosophy of cooperatives is to supply something that's needed. And if there was a need in a small town, probably the hardware is pulled out, probably various other suppliers didn't feel there was an economic base in a small community. This is where the cooperatives come to play, and they supplied this for the smaller communities.
Cenex began during the Great Depression, when rural people had difficulty getting petroleum products. Farmers in Minnesota joined small fuel co-ops to purchase gasoline and oil in bulk. Today, these small co-ops have grown into a $2 billion business that includes refineries, a pipeline network, and oil exploration teams. Cenex furnishes petroleum and other agricultural supplies to more than 300,000 farmers and rural people in 15 different states. What this really means is that Terry Weisenbeck can get fuel delivered to him in the field when he needs it. Chris Weisenbeck gets equipment for his dairy business and up-to-date agronomic information. And the Weisenbeck farm and family can stay in operation.
These farmers that started cooperatives in the late 1800s and early 1900s were not wealthy farmers. They were not people that had a lot of money. They were working people, working the land. And from joining together in these economic activities in the form of cooperatives, they improved the well-being of themselves and their children to the point that today's American agriculture can be considered a prosperous business.
Over the years, millions of people arrived on these shores looking for the land of opportunity. But opportunity is hard to get without banking or credit. In the early 1900s, there was no way for average people to save or borrow money. The big banks lent primarily to big businesses. There was little hope of buying a home or an automobile or sending your kids to a better school. One emergency and you were financially ruined. One alternative was a cooperative bank called a credit union. In a credit union, groups of people put their savings into a pool and provide themselves with credit and banking services. The notion that average people could form their own banks was hard to accept in the 1920s. Visionaries like Edward A. Filene, a wealthy Boston merchant, and Roy Burgengren promoted credit unions as a means for social change. Then came the collapse of Wall Street. Millions of Americans lost faith in their banking system, and credit unions became a popular alternative for millions of people.
Is this credit union a company deal?
No. The company itself has nothing to do with it. They just let us use the room. It was organized by the employees and it's run by the employees. You have to work there to join.
Today, 65 million Americans are members of credit unions. The country's largest credit union is owned by members of the U.S. Navy and Marines. It has nearly 1.4 million members and 81 branch offices.
The obvious problem with sailors is they go to sea. And oftentimes, how do you write a check from a ship 2,000 or 3,000 miles away?
A credit union can be formed by any association or organized group of people. Axle workers in Wisconsin have one. So do these migrant farm workers in Texas. This credit union in Salt Lake City is for the blind and visually handicapped.
Most financial institutions are for profit, and the credit union is not for profit, but for service.
People with disabilities often live on fixed incomes.
Generally, the response is, well, we can't lend it to you because you're not a good risk.
Since credit unions are cooperatives, members can make their own lending policies.
I'm really a big fan of the credit union. I'm very gung-ho as far as the credit union is concerned because when I needed them, they helped me.
Credit unions can also be formed to meet the specific needs of a community. In this Latino neighborhood in Washington, D.C., residents needed a way to cash checks, buy money orders, and save money.
You know, the largest banks in the neighborhoods in the city are the liquor stores. That's where people change their checks.
Many people in the area lost all their money in a savings club scandal.
3,000 people lost $6 million. And those 3,000 were mostly low-income people.
Businesses and local leaders rallied to form what is known as a community development credit union.
This particular certificate of insurance insures the deposits in your credit union up to $100,000.
Any local business or resident can become a credit union member. This couple was one of the first to sign up.
Right now, we don't have no saving account, nothing. So we are trying to save some money to open a business later on, or if they can help us to open a business.
Credit union of this sort is for them the first step in mainstream. It's the first step of becoming a big part of the financial life of the country.
When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected 32nd President of the United States, he promised a new deal for all Americans. The electrification of rural America was on his list. Without the Rural Electric Administration, half the country might still be turning on the power like this. This diesel generator is a far cry from the electric service that most of us have come to expect.
As you can see, it's a bother. It's a kind of a headache in a way. It's done a job, but it's expensive.
But running power lines to the remote valley where Werner Glenn and his wife Wendy live would be even more expensive. In the 1930s, 3 out of every 5 Americans were still living in the dark. Lacking electricity, rural families couldn't use the technological innovations of the 20th century. They had no chance to use Edison's incandescent bulb. Farm women still cooked over wood stoves. They pumped and carried water by hand. They washed clothes in large black pots and ironed them with flat irons. The women called them sad irons, 6 or 7 pounds of solid iron that had to be heated on a wood stove. By noon, she might have blister atop blister on her hand. Private power companies thought that running power to rural parts of the country could not be profitable. Farmers knew that if they pooled their resources, they could provide electricity for themselves. The effort involved a unique arrangement between the U.S. government and hundreds of rural electric cooperatives.
There are no private investors, no profit making. You don't risk any cash yourself except a small membership fee. You get power at cost. When the loan from the government to your cooperative is paid back through your electric bills, you and your neighbors will own your own electric system, your own lines.
Taking electricity to farms and towns was one of the most successful organizing campaigns in the history of the country. The sign-up teams found it better to have farm women present when they talked about the benefits of electricity because it made such a difference in their lives. A man giving witness in a rural Tennessee church said, "The greatest thing is the love of God in your heart, and the next greatest thing is electricity in your house." The Glens finally entered the 20th century when the members of a local rural electric cooperative voluntarily agreed to take a raise in rates in order to run electric lines to the Glens and other families in their valley.
It's really nice to be able to use the appliances that we've gotten for wedding gifts that we've had stored away for 30 or 31 years. And it's amazing the things that we have taken for granted that we can't do. Our clocks never ran right. They never kept good time. And my dishwasher wouldn't work if something else was on. The overloads would kick off, and I'd come in the morning and the dishes wouldn't be clean. It's just a totally new way of life for us here.
I tell you what, when this power line came in, you see going down through there, it was a star in our night. That's all there is to it.
The rural electric system is exploring new ways to bring badly needed services to rural areas. One of them is water sewer systems. This is the Tona Autumn Reservation in southern Arizona. Here, utility cooperatives working with Indian Health Service financing have provided safe drinking water and wastewater systems to 51 villages.
For myself, I remember my mother used to walk down a hill to fetch water from a well, which was about at least 100 yards from our home, and back and forth until she got enough water to wash her clothes.
With improved electric and water utilities, the villages have now become eligible for HUD-financed housing and other community programs.
We just went from house to house, signing up the customers just like folks did in the early days of the REA program. And since that time, the town of Sells here has quadrupled in size.
Follow the crowd to the Empire City, the Wonder City, the Windy City, the Fashion City. We've reached 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. Watch us grow, going up.
In the 1930s and 40s, large cities like New York experienced severe housing shortages. Property prices soared, and working-class people could not afford decent dwellings. They lived in crowded, dangerous tenements and were often the victims of greedy slumlords.
Housing for people of moderate means didn't exist in the city, and if it did, it was very, very poor housing. People got together and said, if we pool our resources, get together and have a vision for the future, we can make an impact in this city.
Garment workers from the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union decided to do something about their living conditions. They wanted decent homes for their children, ones they could own. Individually, they didn't have enough money to buy any kind of property. But when 350 prospective tenants pooled their money, they financed New York's first cooperative housing project for moderate income people. It was called Amalgamated Housing. The success of these garment workers inspired an explosion of cooperative home ownership in the city.
Larry Cohen lives in Co-op City, Building 20B, Section 3, an apartment 4C, it'll always be.
Today, more than 500,000 families live in cooperatives in the metropolitan New York area, many of them in Lower East Side Manhattan.
What I've seen in other neighborhoods where there are no co-ops, where there are just maybe 6, 7-story tenement houses, right? For whatever reason, that neighborhood seems to go downhill and then all of a sudden vanish. Right? We've been here now approximately 60 years Here we are our own landlords. We own it.
The residents take a special pride in their community.
Oh yes, definitely. We're a family here.
This is one of the safest streets, I would say, in Manhattan.
It is just that. We love it. I mean, we wouldn't move.
Residents have a strong democratic voice in how their co-op operates and the services it provides. Members voted to control resale costs to keep housing affordable for people in the neighborhood.
The rent is not high, and the apartments are wonderful, and it makes the people like a family.
When you rent something, you don't have the same feeling for it as if you own it. You'll take better care of it if you own it.
Everyone's benefited by it. People who live in the cooperatives have benefited by having great housing. The city has benefited by having neighborhoods restored. There's no question that cooperatives have played a very vital role in New York City since the 30s and continues to this day.
Cooperative housing isn't just for big cities. This is Greenbelt Homes in Greenbelt, Maryland. Greenbelt was one of the country's first planned communities. It was built by the government in the 1930s as a completely self-contained city with schools, parks, even a shopping center.
The federal government decided to get out of the housing business and decided to sell all the property they owned in Greenbelt. The people who lived in the 1,600 homes organized and decided that they would buy the homes and the adjacent land from the federal government, and negotiated with the federal government and took a 20-year mortgage and bought the homes and formed a cooperative and incorporated themselves. People who live in Greenbelt love Greenbelt. People that come here develop very deep roots.
The main advantage of living here is that it's small, you get to know everybody, and it's relatively inexpensive.
Members of the cooperative do not actually own their homes. Instead, they own a share of the housing corporation. Membership in the cooperative also provides housing maintenance.
It's convenient because I can pick up the phone and say my toilet leaks, my doorknob doesn't work anymore, and they come and fix it.
Greenbelt residents use cooperatives for more than housing. There's a cooperative grocery store, a cooperative gas station, a community credit union, even a cooperative community newspaper.
And this is the very heart of what makes Greenbelt such a successful community, that there's so many people working together to make their community better for all of us.
Cooperative housing is common in most parts of the country. This project in Minnesota is for the elderly.
I like living here very, very much. I can still live independently. If I have a problem, I know all I need to do is yell. Somebody is going to hear me. And that means an awful lot to me.
Cooperative housing makes the American dream of home ownership a reality.
So I moved in here 12 years ago, and you can't beat it. I wouldn't own anything else but a co-op.
Following World War II, many Americans were concerned about the plight of the hungry and homeless in Europe. Food had to be made available quickly and affordably. No single person or group could manage the enormous undertaking. 26 organizations serving in fields of welfare, religion, business, insurance, and labor brought their strengths together to form one of the largest hunger-fighting organizations in the world. It was called the Cooperative for American Remittances to Europe, or CARE.
CARE will act as a means for the whole country to provide a hungry person in Europe with food enough for 3 or 4 weeks. I commend it to the people of the United States.
Around the world, the CARE package became a symbol of American goodwill. From its earliest days, CARE stressed the cooperative principle of self-help, giving people food to survive, but also giving them tools and equipment to feed themselves.
CARE has distributed more than $4 billion worth of food, medical supplies, self-help equipment, development materials, and so forth, so that it's now the largest non-profit, non-governmental, non-sectarian development organization in the world. But hardly anybody knows yet that it's a cooperative.
CARE is now an international organization with projects in more than 38 countries. One of them is Somalia. In November of 1992, as many as 2,000 Somalis were dying of starvation each day. Most of them were children.
He doesn't have a father and mother, they're all dead.
They died?
Yeah.
Do you know why?
They say one is he died as a sickness, the other one is the problems with bullets or something. But he doesn't know how they died.
So who's going to take care of these children?
For CARE.
CARE distributed desperately needed food and medical supplies throughout the country. CARE agricultural specialists work with Somali farmers to help them plant their first crops in years. By March of 1993, deaths from hunger had all but disappeared. CARE is what happens when people cooperate.
Shop, shop, shop away at the co-op store. Better buying, I like it more and more. I like it more and more.
In the 1960s, a new generation of Americans discovered cooperation. Co-op stores became an alternative source for low-cost organic foods and supplies. The idea seemed revolutionary at the time, but consumer-owned stores started in America many years before. Miners in Ohio and Minnesota needed some alternative to the inflated prices of company-owned stores. So they formed consumer cooperatives to provide food, clothing, and hardware at reduced prices. Today, consumer cooperatives are as common as the neighborhood grocery store. This one is in Atlanta, Georgia.
The store grew out of the hippie revolution in the 60s and 70s, where people wanted more control of their lifestyle. There were people that wanted to join together to buy food that was healthy. The problem was at the time there were a lot of community corporate-owned grocery stores that were selling low-quality food at high prices. And Seven Onda was a group of people, many of them from diverse points of view, that wanted to band together and do the food the way it needs to be done, naturally and with whole foods. It's not only about food, it's about control. It's about the choices that are in the store, it's about the quality, the prices are included, but it's about control of what they've got to be able to buy. And Seven Onda offers the choice that people want.
When consumers got together and organized to provide themselves with stores that sold natural food products, they were saying, we want these products in the marketplace. And if the market won't provide them, we'll organize our own stores to provide them.
During the 1970s, two incomes became necessary to sustain most families, and parents began to organize cooperative child care centers. This one is in Reston, Virginia. Consumers form cooperatives to provide themselves with any needed service or product.
Reston Children's Center was started because a group of parents felt they wanted to have a strong voice in where they sent their children for all-day and part-day programs. So they decided to form a cooperative.
Parents began by leasing space from a local church. By 1981, membership had become so large, they decided to finance and build their own facility.
The co-op atmosphere seems to have more emphasis on quality and not so much on the profit margin or profit taking.
Parents elect the board of directors who hire the staff and determine the policies of the organization. They also volunteer time to help reduce expenses.
Being a co-op, just by definition, has the term of unity and people contributing to the total cause of the center.
Cooperatives give parents a chance to be involved in their child's child care, and this is very important.
Financing is often a problem for co-ops trying to get started. For this reason, an act of Congress in 1978 created the National Cooperative Bank. The bank's purpose is to help finance a wide range of consumer, housing, and business cooperatives. With this assistance, the cooperative idea has expanded. In the 1980s, interest in the environment and outdoor recreation prompted the growth of the largest consumer cooperative in America. It is called Recreational Equipment Incorporated, or REI. The cooperative was formed in the 1930s by famous mountaineers Lloyd and Mary Anderson. The idea was to furnish themselves and others with specialty mountain climbing gear that could only be obtained in Europe. From its first retail location in this gas station in Seattle, the cooperative now has 41 retail stores nationwide and more than 1 million members. It also has a division for mail order sales.
REI is such a very large group that they buy, I would imagine, very large quantities of carabiners, helmets, clothing, anything that I'm looking for, and can pass the savings on to its members.
Any profits are returned to members based on the amount of regular priced products they had purchased,
which I think generally tends to run about 10% of the purchases that I've made through the year.
REI members share a common concern for the environment.
I grew up hunting and fishing, being in the outdoors, and it hurts me to see the environment destroyed or not cared for and nurtured.
Because of this, REI members encourage their cooperative to support conservation and cleanup efforts that protect the outdoors for recreation. Healthcare reform is one of the most critical issues in the country today. Cooperatives have been reforming healthcare for decades.
The first cooperative in the healthcare industry was organized by a group of farmers in Oklahoma who couldn't afford to pay doctor bills, and the doctors were claiming their land for non-payment of bills. Farmers were being forced off the land. And a doctor organized a hospital and a clinic to provide care for those farmers, and they, the farmers themselves, invested the money and pooled the money to build this hospital.
This is Group Health Cooperative of Puget Sound in Seattle, Washington. It has been a model for successful health care since the 1940s and was inspired by the Oklahoma farmers. The cooperative won the landmark court decision, making it possible to provide medical care to members on a fixed fee basis. This is known as an HMO, or Health Maintenance Organization.
Doctors working on a salary at that time was not generally an accepted practice. And then we kicked it off in a different way too, and it's been the policy, the organization ever since, that it was cheaper to keep you well than it was to take care of you after you got sick. Preventive health care, that was the idea from the very beginning.
What makes this group health different from other HMOs is that it's a cooperative. The consumers own the business and have a stake in controlling quality and costs. The cooperative also controls costs by encouraging prevention. Like all cooperatives, group health is a democracy. Members, through their board of directors, have a voice in the policies of the organization. For instance, members voted to cover lung transplants. They raised rates 25 cents per month to pay for it. Controlling the cost of health care is a particular concern for the elderly. This is the United Seniors Health Cooperative of Washington, D.C.
I need help mostly with billing. When I get billed for something I feel I don't owe, and I can call them and they can tell me whether I do or whether I don't.
The cooperative uses specially designed computer programs to analyze gaps in members' Medicare coverage. Then, with the collective buying power of 8,000 members, It negotiates supplemental insurance plans.
This cooperative has helped me considerably. With one phone call, I can get all the answers I need from this cooperative.
In Denver, Colorado, businesses large and small formed a bargaining cooperative called the Alliance.
It started in 1988 with 5 employers who signed the original Articles of Incorporation. Within 18 months, it had 1,000 employers, 100,000 employee lives, and had become the 4th largest managed care organization in the state of Colorado.
The co-op bargains collectively on behalf of its members with local physicians and hospitals.
There's not much difference between a group of farmers getting together to find a way to ship grain to the market than a group of employers getting together to buy health benefits.
For more than 50 years, cooperatives have been an effective cure for health care. Today, the cooperative idea is alive and well and growing in America. In inner cities, in small townships, in rural areas, and in businesses. Cooperatives are helping people to help themselves and changing lives for the better. This is South Central Los Angeles. Following the disturbances of 1992, South Central residents banded together to rebuild their community. Rather than wait for solutions, they formed the Community Development Credit Union.
We are at the 54th and Crenshaw in the heart of South Central Los Angeles, and that's where the credit union will be located. It is the largest community development federal credit union per population in the United States. If you live in the area, work in the area, perform a service in the area, or go to church in the area, you can be a member of the credit union, and that's very important when banking services are very, very slim in this community.
The credit union will finance affordable housing, small businesses, and churches in the area.
This credit union is a community development credit union, which means its purpose is to develop the community that it services.
Only a few miles away, in the neighborhood of Aliso Pico, a small church uses cooperatives to create job opportunities for its people.
I think the most creative thing that we've been able to put together is a thing called the Dolores Mission Women's Cooperative. It's a group of women here from the neighborhood who got together. They needed to find work, but they didn't have childcare.
The cooperative is the mothers working together. In the beginning, the mothers don't pay nothing the money. They bring the food, one mother's cooking, and the other mothers keep the children, and the other mothers looking for jobs.
Well, I think the most interesting thing we've got going now is the thing which is behind you. It's called Homeboy Industries. We've got 2 projects, Homeboy Bakery and Homeboy Tortillas. They are economic development projects which are working to train and employ young men and women of the community, gang-impacted youth.
You know what I mean? If you don't have a job, where are you going to be? Outside, selling drugs, somehow to get money. So this is a good start for a lot of us.
I guess the whole idea is for us to come up so the next one could come up and keep going, so all of us just, you know, we all have a chance in life.
I think a cooperative or some kind of a structure where people have a real say in not only what they're doing, but the way we go about doing it is, I think, something which is going to make sense, which provides community-based economic development, and I think is really faithful to what I, as a priest, and to what I think church-motivated and church movement people want to be doing.
The lack of decent, affordable housing has destabilized many inner-city communities. In Washington, D.C., cooperative housing is a solution.
We have a law here that says that you can't sell a building until you offer it to the tenants first. And what you see here today are a group of people who worked very, very hard a number of years ago. They cooperated in the best possible way, and they bought this building. A cooperative method of home ownership is one of the most exciting, easiest ways, really, for a person who's never been able to buy a home before to become a homeowner. If you have people who are not as strong as others as far as their credit is concerned, the strength of the group carries them through.
In another D.C. neighborhood, tenants got together to form a food buying cooperative to purchase food at bulk discounts.
The members are also the volunteers. They not only buy the food, they break the food down, they decide how much money they're going to spend, and also distribute the food in the evening. So it is a cooperative effort.
Many communities lack access to basic health care services. Residents of East Boston, Massachusetts, joined together to create a community health care center.
There were so many houses and so many people. We were just really overwhelmed by the need for services and the limitations of what we had to provide it.
Working with the City of Boston and health agencies, residents were able to create a comprehensive health care facility. This nonprofit center is owned and controlled by the people who use it. It makes medical care easily available to a neighborhood of 33,000 people. Welcome to Davis, California, often called the city of cooperatives. Here, consumer cooperatives create employment and small businesses. There are more than 26 cooperatives in the city. Everything from housing co-ops to child care centers. The Davis Food Co-op is the only supermarket in the downtown area.
There used to be a Safeway here. The Safeway decided to close down, and Central Davis at that point had no grocery store, and it was an ideal place for us to move in. We have about 4,000 members now. They realize that they are owners of the co-op, and they want to patronize it because of that.
I've been a co-op member since back in 1979, I think, and when it was quite a small store. And now it's a much bigger store, but I still feel like it's my store, that when I come in, I'm part of what makes it all happen.
Cooperatives thrive in Davis because they meet local needs.
Well, first of all, cooperatives are not going to pick up and leave the community because business turns down. So you have, I think, stable places which are affordable for people to live. So that the food cooperative, for example, that started in my living room, now is among the largest employers in the city of Davis, and it's a good employer. It provides childcare services and other kinds of things employees want. So how did that come about? Not through a loan, not really through government capitalization, but through many people putting small amounts of dollars together and then working hard to grow the business over the last 20 years.
In the fields and towns of the rural South, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives helps African-American farmers hold on to a vanishing way of life.
Right now, in my area here in Worth County, I can count maybe 3 or 4 black farmers in Worth County, whole Worth County. And they holding on by 3, just like me, holding on.
These men mortgaged their land when their crops failed and lost a farm that had been in the family for generations.
It's rough, bad feeling, trouble feeling. You don't know where you're gonna go, what you're gonna do. I mean, if you ain't got no income and can't find a job, which I've been looking for, I mean, it's rough.
With cooperatives, we think is a way to reverse that. And in many cases, we've saved a lot of land and farmers in rural communities by telling small landowners, you don't need to mortgage your land for a tractor. You can buy it, you know, and use it through your cooperative. 5 black farmers can come together as a cooperative unit and buy a tractor or truck, and not having to mortgage their individual land. They can use it and use it collectively and market the produce, take it to market.
25 or 30 people get together as a co-op. We can buy and sell at a good market price. That's what I like about a co-op.
Employee ownership is another growing form of cooperation. This is Weirton Steel in Weirton, West Virginia. Weirton has been a company town for generations. So when the mill threatened to close down, more than steel was at stake. The parent company felt that the operation could not make a profit, so it decided to downsize to a finishing company.
Consequently, that meant reducing their workforce from 12,500 down to 1,500.
It was either the employees buy the mill or not have a job. Exactly what it came down to.
The mill was offered to its 8,000 employees for $370 million. One of the criteria for the purchase was that each of the employees give up 20% of their salary and benefits. This was their investment. With this, they became the owners of their own business.
If you didn't have a steel mill, you wouldn't have a grocery store, you wouldn't have a clothing store, you wouldn't have a TV store, because everything comes from this company here, the whole valley.
Small businesses can also form cooperatives. This hardware store is a member of the Ace Hardware Corporation.
If we weren't a member of the ACE Cooperative, we couldn't have national advertising, we wouldn't have the kinds of benefit packages, we wouldn't have the kinds of computer equipment that we can have. Through a large group, which is over 5,000 members, that power of that group has a significant impact.
Not all employee-owned companies are large. This graphic design studio in Washington, D.C. is owned cooperatively.
In the business world, a lot of things have to be compromised. If you only work on your area, you don't see other people's point of view. And by become a co-op, everybody has equal input. You will force yourself to see from other people's point of view. I think that in the long run is very productive.
Taking high technology to rural America is the purpose of the NRTC. Its members are rural electric and telephone cooperatives from around the country. They have joined together to bring television and other communication services to rural areas.
What you're seeing here behind me is a mock-up of a satellite that's going to radically alter the way America watches TV. It is the backbone of a delivery system called Direct Broadcast Satellite, which will enable rural Americans and urban Americans, for that matter, to receive over 150 channels of television over a satellite dish antenna only 18 inches across.
The combined investment of many cooperatives partially financed the launching of the satellite. The co-op now purchases television programming and receiving equipment at volume discounts for its members.
By providing the service economically and affordably, we're bringing rural America into the information age.
Developing alternative sources of energy is an expensive proposition. This solar research center in California is a cooperative business formed by major utilities, corporations, and state and federal agencies.
The ultimate goal of PVUSA is to determine the viability of large-scale applications of photovoltaics for the utility industry. By having a larger group of individuals involved in it, it's provided more monies for the development of PV and the purchases of separate systems, whereby if it was just one entity that was doing the research, there wouldn't be the funds available.
Even governments can form cooperatives. Intelsat is the world's largest system of satellite communications. It is owned cooperatively by more than 130 different nations, including the U.S. In 1969, the cooperative made it possible to broadcast the first lunar landing to 500 million spectators around the world.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
As members of Intelsat, small countries like Ghana or the Philippines have access to the same technology as large countries. And this technology makes global communications a reality. So when we say the sky is the limit with cooperation, It's no exaggeration. For more than 200 years, cooperatives have been a vital part of America. They bring us news and information, an abundant supply of food, mutual insurance and credit unions, utilities, and consumer-owned businesses. They are a way to own a home, a way to show we care, and a way to help ourselves, our neighbors, and our communities. In cooperatives, men and women have in their hands the tools to fashion their own destiny. For more information on cooperatives or how to obtain a copy of this video, send a stamped, self-addressed, legal-size envelope to the National Cooperative Center, 1401 New York Avenue Northwest, Suite 1100, Washington, D.C. 20005.